Hello, good morning, Bruins. Thanks to the snow day, we're going to do this a little differently than we normally perform. So we're going to do this virtually. Hopefully I can get a little more sound and gain in there. All right. I'm going to go over chapters 8 and 9 today. And I am at home, have a house full. So if you hear dogs and other things in the background, please ignore it. And since I did not eat breakfast, there will be minor munching in the background. Okay. Chapter 8, talking about the basic outlines of quality, service, and goods in production. This will be a brief overview. We're going to cut through 2 chapters. We're not going to dwell on too much. Again, this should be maybe 30 minutes per chapter, just a brief overview. If you have additional questions, please feel free to contact me and I can go in depth. We can either do email, I can try to set up a team, or we can do something along another Zoom meeting. So, and if anyone else is watching this outside of the class, this will be publicly made available. This is not a substitute for you talking to your instructor. Very nature, when you're producing things, you want to have some reasonable bit of quality. We will get into the next chapter as far as how you make sure you have that quality. One of the key things is the employees, but now we're talking about the raw materials, production, and at the time of this recording, we are just on the other side of the pandemic. So resourcing and production is an extremely important piece as far as business operations. It probably was running so well, no one ever paid attention to it. Now that it is not running as it once was, more emphasis is placed on how well you can actually keep the factors of production as far as raw materials, the construction itself running smoothly. This falls in line primarily with the operations manager, someone who's in charge of getting everything you need to actually get the things done. It entails a few things. One is you're trying to figure out what you need, and that would refer to you trying to understand the marketplace itself. You plan, of course, in any step in the business process, there must be planning involved. You're not running without some type of guide or some type of intent where you are headed. Then the controls of the operations, again, making sure there's a quality product. You have to have some parameters and getting into how many errors and defects that might be part of a good stat class. What do you keep on hand as far as inventory and the cost involved in all of that? Bad news for your manufacturers. Manufacturing sector has decreased due to automation, due to competitors, and also due to the idea of outsourcing materials, or someone just brings in some materials from another country. The American company may not be sending the work itself to another country, but someone may be just competing and be able to produce it at a lower level. Normally, we think of this as assets in Asia or other countries where employment per capita or income per capita is a lot lower. There are some countries in Eastern Europe, there are some countries in Africa where they can find labor that might not be $15 an hour as it is in the United States. It might be $15 a day. So one of the expenses would be much lower. Good news for manufacturers, you can increase productivity quite a bit because of highly skilled laborers and the idea of automation making it easier. You also get a high degree of, we'll just say, sameness. When you have things built by hand, you will get unique and different variations. Usually with automation, you get one variance. They all appear to be the same, and they are pretty much alike. And if you have the first one, that appears pretty good, there's a strong possibility that the rest will also look pretty good as well. Again, if you have everything set up correctly, if the first widget off the line looks good, there's a high probability that the rest of the widgets will look good as well. And because of the manufacturing base in the United States, which considered the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, once you get it up and running, you can pretty much keep it consistent. As I said earlier, no one planned for a pandemic to tear apart the supply chain. Aside from that, once you have things in place, you should be able to run a pretty smooth ship as far as it relates to you producing the next batch of widgets or organic brownies, as we've discussed in class. The careers inside of there, a good opportunity for people looking for employment. There are a couple of ways that you actually get the process. Mass production, usually you can produce a lot of something. Widgets, again, Rubik's Cubes, and such a high volume, it is fairly cheap. If you're going to buy a single container of ketchup, it's one price. If you get a bigger bottle per unit, an ounce or a gram, however you want to measure it, it generally gets cheaper. So when you're buying in mass bulk, you tend to get the quantities cheaper. Then there's the refinement process, taking something and turning it into something else. And there's a combination of you doing many things, a little bit of refinement, a little bit of individuality, and a little bit of mass production. The operation manager, as any manager, must be fairly skilled, able to work with a lot of technology, regardless of where the field is. If you're in charge of the production, you probably have to have a decent understanding of technology to some degree. And you might be close to the customer, which means you have to have a different skill set. The people behind the wall, putting the pieces of the widget together, and the people who are facing the customers. Something that we've talked about briefly, however, you are providing a utility for the customer. You're satisfying some need that they want. Utility is in most of the business textbooks. It's the beginning of all economics textbooks. We're not referring to cash. So when we discuss utility, you have to think of something other than money. In most of the books, unless you're into finance, do not discuss money in great detail. Utility means satisfying some need. Utility, and there are four places: the form, the place, the time, and the possession. You as the production manager will be in charge of creating a lot of that to get the utility that is needed to finish the goods. It's a somewhat long chart, and as I've talked about before, anytime there's a small print on a chart, we don't spend a lot of time on it. I'll let you catch up with that in your textbook, because it's a little strenuous to actually provide data and feedback on such a small graph. So we're going to move on. In the manufacturing, you're converting some raw resource or some converted resource to something else. You may not make the tire, but you may need the other ingredients to finish the process. If you're manufacturing a car, the company isn't making the tires, not making the seats, they're putting everything together. If we're making our widgets and it looks like a Rubik's Cube, if you don't know what that is, please look it up. You're probably not making the stickers that go on it. You're probably just making the plastic piece that it goes on. You're not making the packaging in-house. You're probably ordering quite a bit of that. The other part is you probably have a fairly complicated system since you're not making everything in-house. The one company that probably does it very well and better than most would be General Electric. In manufacturing such things as jet engines, you have to work with who you're supplying them to, which may be Boeing or Airbus. And the other side, you are trying to get the other pieces that you need to put it together. You're probably not making everything in that engine. You're probably not making every tube, pipe, and bit of wiring, but it has to be made to certain tolerance levels. So you have to work with your suppliers and the people that you are supplying for as well. And every bit of business, it is a service. This goes to everything that you do. You are providing a service to the employer is supplying a service to a customer. Again, back to the utility for everyone involved. The service industry is much bigger. As we've discussed in prior meetings, understand manufacturing has gotten smaller because of automation. You don't necessarily need as many people. So you are trying to satisfy the utility. The fact that we're all on a computer, we can't physically touch the internet. However, we're looking for the utility involved in that. Now we need the computer and everything else, but you don't need as many people to make a computer as you did in the past. And along everything else that we have, I have headphones on, I have a separate mic, etc., etc. We're getting more into the service aspect of it. Streaming, music, and everything else. Things that you can't touch really or hold. If you go to a restaurant, you're not really buying the meal, you're buying the fact that someone prepared it. And in that, as far as the production of the good, your role is to make sure everything meets a certain quality level. Everything should be there or better. You're providing a service, no matter what it is, even if you're giving a tangible object, you're providing a service. If I'm at the point where I need to replace a doorknob, I expect some minimal tolerance level as far as the doorknob, so I don't have to replace it for another 20 years. Evaluating that quality, again, on both sides of the equation, where you are getting the material from, what are you supplying to the customer, and what's going on internally. Solving particular problems as they occur. What does the customer need? Whether or not this is labor intensive, maybe it be more service intensive. Again, at a restaurant, it's service intense. If you were talking about manufacturing widgets, Rubik's Cubes, and doorknobs, then you're referring to a physical aspect. And even then, you are sending out a relationship to the customer. As it doesn't appear that way, once you have set up certain quality parameters, then you have to figure out, do I want to go back to this particular brand? So it creates a great deal of brand awareness. Still talking about the quality. As I was relating my story trying to replace a busted doorknob, there was a woman who was looking for a doorknob as well, and she had great success with a particular brand. That influenced me to use that brand when I replaced the doorknob. If you have a good experience at a restaurant, you would likely to tell a few friends, and now you have repeat business. If you're not happy, you're likely to post it on social media. As with everything, there's a bunch of R&D involved. You can probably imagine a great deal of R&D to doing design, fabrication, and getting a supply line set up in order to produce a physical good. You still need to do R&D when you're doing an intangible sales, even at a restaurant. A lot of people doing research on how you should set the restaurant up, how long it should take for an order. They should have a system designed up for everything, even including the table, which is the best method. You want to be as efficient as possible. I mentioned a story before. In a grocery store, I've noticed some people are sent out to go get the shopping carts and bring them back in. Some people will gather the carts that are closest to the door. They will start to form the line of shopping carts push all the carts to the end and get the last cart, and then bring all the carts back to the store compared to starting at the end of the parking lot, gathering them, and then you don't have to push this long line of 10 to 15 carts the entire length of the parking lot. It's something perhaps simple, basic, and if you're not really paying attention, it's those little things that'll make the whole system inefficient. So in everything, even in service industries, there's a great deal of R&D going into it. You can imagine if you're putting together the jet engines, the tremendous amount of R&D that's involved. We're not going to go over those. The plans of production, again, R&D, how are you going to convert that into some good and or service that you're going to get to consumer? What do you have on your site in order to do that? And then how do you make sure that everything is working? That is the operational managers. First of all, we need to design how things are going. If you're thinking about a factory, it is set up in a particular way. We're going to focus on an automobile factory. I'm from the Midwest, so that's the first thing that comes to mind as far as automation in a factory. It is laid out in a particular manner, in a particular system. You're not going to get the seats and not have a frame to put them on. And they've done enough work to figure out what is the easiest way to get the most complicated pieces in first. It's probably easier to get the dashboard and certain pieces in before you try to put the seats in. Those things are probably going in last, I would imagine. I can't truly envision someone trying to put a center or a dashboard in after the seats have been placed in. So the order of the process, and they're constantly reviewing and refining those things. How much capacity do you have? In this sense, trying to figure out how many widgets you can actually produce in a day. If you need more capacity, you obviously need more space either in the plant or you need bigger equipment to make the good. If you only need 10,000 units a month, you don't need to purchase a piece of equipment that'll make 20. And it gets back into other things that we can discuss a little later on. If you foresee a major increase in the demand side, maybe you do need the bigger piece of equipment. Labor intensity, or is it capital intense? One refers to things have to be done by hand, the old hammer and chisel, or can you get away with doing a lot of technology? Can you automate the process? That is capital intense. If you need things that are labor intense, you tend to go to places where labor is cheap. If you have things that are capital intense, you tend to manufacture in areas where you can get the capital fairly easy. So in my scenario, if it's the cube or I'm putting together a simple widget and there might be a lot of labor involved, I'm probably going to try and get the cheapest labor I can. If I'm putting together computer chips and I possibly need more skilled labor, I'm probably going to go somewhere else. Where do you want to put the plant? As we discussed in class, most of the time, what I'm trying to get you to do when I ask you for business information is looking at when things are new. Where do people or companies decide to put plants? Sometimes it's based on a tax credit or some type of carrot to entice the company to locate there, but they have to look at other things as well. Are you related to a reasonable and accessible transportation hub? Water, rail, air. What is the road and infrastructure system? What is the labor supply like? Are the people skilled enough to do the job? What are the local taxes and regulations? Will I have a problem trying to, if I put a plant and I have 500 people coming here, will the local citizens be upset with this increase in traffic? Those type of things are extremely important. And as we already discussed, what type of layout of the plant in and of itself? Will it be something that actually has to change a great deal? If we're still talking about cars and you're bringing a car to get it serviced, then you need the jacks to raise the car up. That stays stationary, but you should have enough tools to do most of the jobs depending on what the car needs in a different in different bays. It shouldn't matter. You should be able to get most of it done. I'm sure in the repair shop there are certain areas that certain jobs can only be done. If we're doing an assembly line, again, the frame comes in first, then you put the engine in, then you start to putting the internals such as the dashboard, you're getting around to the seats after that, etc. If it is a fixed position, then everyone brings the stuff or brings the supplies and the parts to the object. The airplane is the best example. If you've ever seen any newsreels on that, you're not going to have an assembly line for a plane. Most of it has to be done by hand, so the plane sits stationary and the workers bring whatever they need to put the plane together to the body. There's no assembly line method for you putting in the seats per se. And this is just a simple outline of, again, what it looks like. And I'll let you look at that at your leisure. It's also in your textbook, obviously. Operational planning. Are we talking about horizontal planning? How far along the line are we looking at this particular object? 15 minutes this way, 15 minutes that way. What do you think the market is going to be currently? Back to our widget analogy, do you need a piece of equipment that'll make 10,000 widgets, or do you need something that'll make 20? If you think it's going to expand, do you want to spend the money to get the bigger device to make 20 widgets, although you only need 7,000 widgets today? Last, how do you accommodate any expansion or contraction? Perhaps you're going to need fewer workers. Do you have a contingency for that? And it goes into the layout. What is the bare minimum number of employees that you need? If you have to reduce the workforce, can it still be done? Or have you spread out the factory or the layout to the point where you have to keep such a high number of employees, it's going to be difficult for you to reduce it because of the way that the system is set up? Meaning, perhaps you can get someone to work on machine A. Once it's done processing, that person can move over to machine B to finish up the next process. If the production needs to be slowed, you may need two people if production has to be high. Maybe one person could do it if you're not producing as many widgets. But if machine A and machine B are in two totally different warehouses, it's going to be hard to actually get employee Jane to go from machine A. She's got to move all the widgets still in process to machine B in building 2, compared to maybe it's all in one building. Aspects of the operational control. You need to get the raw materials. What do you need for the widgets? The example the textbook using is, again, the blue jeans. Levi is not making the denim. They're getting it from a supplier. They're not making the jeans. They're getting all of these and just simply putting them together. It's simple for some manufacturers to make all of the zippers. They're going to make them in a much larger bulk than even Levi's, and it's simply easier for them to get cost effective and efficient. So where are you going to get the materials from? As we talked about, you want a high degree of quality and consistency. If you're going to sample out of a batch of 10, you want 9 to be in excellent condition, 10 perfection, probably not, but you want at least high degrees of consistency. Is 9 have to be within a certain tolerance level. The 10th one, yeah, borderline or even better than the other 9. The inventory and controlling, we are post-pandemic, and this has proven to be possibly the most critical part of this production cycle. It was running so well, no one paid attention to it. Now everyone is paying attention to it. How much do you keep on hand? If you keep a lot on hand, you have to have additional space and you have to store it, which means you may have to have people doing security at night more than you might normally do just to protect your inventory. Vandalism, if nothing else. A bunch of young and spirited gentlemen usually come in and decide to mess things up. Do you keep enough on hand to last a month, a week, maybe a year? There's also something called just in time, under the assumption that everything works perfectly and that I'm going to run out on Friday. What I need comes in on Wednesday. And we keep doing this over and over again. So every Wednesday, you get a shipment just in time so you don't run out. It's going to supply you enough for a week or so for next week, and it keeps going on and on and on. This is what the idea of JIT. You don't keep a lot of over inventory. You also have to spend a lot of money. It's going to cost you a whole lot to keep 6 months worth of a supply in compared to once a week I'm paying for it. A little more work, but there's more cash available for other things in your business. Scheduling, excuse me, simply referring to I have to have part A go to meet up with part B in building 3 to form part C. And it doesn't do you any good if A is sitting 2 days collecting dust waiting on part B to join up to create part C. You want them to get together just about at the same time so they can be assembled. This is what we're referring to as far as scheduling. In the service industry, you're making sure you have enough people on staff at a restaurant during the rush. There's actually software to let you calculate that. Again, making sure that you have ample quality and consistency. Those who aren't in the industry, there are certain quality controls and awards that come into play. If I'm going to pull out a batch of widgets, I should be able to take random samples and make sure the consistency of the batch is within certain parameters. This entails you, the production manager, to pull out random pieces, test them to make sure they're within certain guidelines and benchmarks so you can have successful practice. It's not going to do any good if you do not test to make sure that the product is met up to certain standards that you've promised to the customer. If you're going to tell the customer this is the highest grade and it breaks within a year, unless it's something really temporary, you're going to lose business and you're pretty much not held up your end of the bargain with the consumer. You may have seen this on certain buildings, on trucks, and other things. International Organization of Standards, it has to meet certain universal standards set up by that particular benchmark, by that particular business. It has to meet that particular parameters as far as quality and service. Summary of what we've discussed already. As the businesses begin to get more and more efficient, you should see some reasonable production as far as growth, or growth in production, sorry. If you're looking at this, you would expect during the collapse after the housing bubble in the United States, the production dropped. Then you see the rebound. and production had dropped so low, probably wasn't a huge deal to bring it back up, and then you see it slowly shrinking down. The reason that you don't see as much growth is probably because you have a mature market and there isn't as much to sell, so you don't need as much growth. The growth for cell phones was huge, but now everyone seems to have a cell phone, so you're not going to see the demand for cell phones peak as much as you may have in the past. They've gotten better and better, so people tend to keep them a little longer, unless you're the type of person who just wants to have the newest and greatest invention in the cell phone. Okay, always improving. Every time its goods are going out, it should be a little better than the last one. Now, it should be. There's a lot of argument to say back in the day, things were made a little better because they weren't designed to be as expendable. I will agree with that. There are things that were made, they were truly heavy, they had higher tolerance levels, where now they might be made with a little bit of aluminum before they may have been made with heavy cast iron steel or something. So you may have to worry about a little rust, but it's probably going to stand there for a good 100 years. Other things that improve productivity and quality, just the technology aspects of this. CAD is probably one of the more commonly known things, computer aided design. You avoid a lot of trial and error. You can put everything into a computer and run a lot of simulations before you actually get started. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to work in the real world just because it worked in the software. However, you have a much better chance of it working better after you've ran it through certain simulations. More of the process can be adapted and changed. Again, back to you doing this on a computer, assuming that you may have to make adjustments, you can run this all in 3D software to see what it would look like before you go and make the items. So, all right, we have covered chapter 8, and we'll take a quick break. I will pause it, let you get some more coffee. Now we're back and we will start chapter 9. Okay, got a little tea, so we should be good at least for the next 30 minutes or so. As we're doing our business, we have to have a key ingredient that would be quality employees. Once you have one, the idea is to keep that quality employee. Whether it is Jack or Jane, if they are a great employee, the idea is you have to make sure that they are happy and willing to stay. Remember, you are always looking out for another employee in case someone quits or something, they decide to move and leave the company or retire. The employee is doing the same thing. The most common reason people quit a job is not the job, it's the manager. So, what can we do to keep those great employees? We're going to understand what HR, human resources, planning on how that goes, job index analysis, pardon me, selecting employees, compensation, benefits, training, and overall feedback. The unit or division in charge of hiring is the resources management department. They're the ones who are in charge of getting the employees, maintaining and developing the employees. That last part, most people aren't aware of. Developing means making sure that they keep their skills and improving the existing skills. Your activities, again, planning for future needs. The business needs to expand. you probably need to make sure that is taken care of. What type of turnover ratio do you have? How many employees do you currently have? How many do plan to quit, retire, or something? And you need to replace them. Again, the stories when I was a financial advisor, it was customer retention in the same aspect, but you knew you had a certain turnover ratio. Even if people liked you, they were going to leave at some point, meaning they were going to pass. Employees are going to retire at some point, no matter how much they like the job, they're going to have to leave at some point, one way or another. So, have to plan for future needs. And as your textbooks notes, what type of job position do you have? We'll get into descriptions of that. How do you get the best people for your particular firm? A lot goes on into this, and there's plenty of advertising, possibly because I'm always listening to business channels. There's advertising, excuse me, as it relates to hiring the best people. We'll get into the digital format is how that's being done now. I cannot remember the last time I filled out a physical application until I had the job in hand. Then they want you to fill out additional paperwork there, but most of it is electronic. One of the key things everyone asks, and you should probably wait till the end of the interview before you ask, what is the compensation package? If you're advertising, you have to display that. That's probably the key thing. What the employee wants. The employer is trying to get the person at the lowest cost. The employee is looking for someone who's going to pay them the most. So now we're getting into supply and demand aspects. But that is going to be the thing that most people are concerned with. You're going to be responsible for the interviewing. Exit interviewing is becoming a really good thing now. Understanding what went well and what doesn't well and what you need to improve upon. And of course, any benefits or things of that nature, healthcare, dental care, etc. Other aspects is trying to improve the employee's skill set. What training is involved? How do you give feedback to tell the employee they're doing great, keep it up, or you need to work on this area and improve? Do you have benefits for additional training? If you go to get an associate's degree, will there be some type of benefit to the employee? Will they get a promotion? Will they get raised? A little bit of both. Something to think about as far as human resources. List of the things that HR is responsible for: getting people in, training them, handling compensation, having guidelines. What are the rules of the business? Certain things, again, treating other employees with respect. We're going to get into diversity and other things, but this is what HR is for. Not only getting people in, making sure they stay in, and setting up guidelines on what the employer and the employee are responsible for. You have to do a lot of planning. If you are a small business and just getting started, you can probably hire a company to help you with the HR. A lot of things come into that. One primarily is payroll. How do you set all of that up? What do you think you will need in the future? What do you have currently? HR is responsible to work with the rest of the management team for that. You have a new project coming online. Okay, what skills do you need? HR should be getting ready to actually start to fill those positions. This is a simple supply and demand aspect. What do you think you're going to need? Is the forecast for the technology good, bad, or indifferent? Are you going to need more tech, less tech? Will you need people to help service the machines if you're going to do automation? Someone's got to keep the machines running. Maintenance is hugely important. That is going to be something you'll need, and HR has to be a part of that. One of the businesses that overdid this during the pandemic was a company called Peloton. They build stationary bikes. They believed everyone would buy the bikes, keep them forever, And they even had a prescription or subscription, sorry, service where you could sign up and then you'd be able to get into certain videos that you could show on the monitor that came with the bike, and you're following trainers or some ride along the a bike trail in Italy or something of that nature. Well, during the pandemic, when people couldn't go out, it worked quite well. Once people were allowed to go back out, they went back to the gyms. So Peloton had spent a great deal of time, money, and resources getting a huge staff. They had gone from simply sending the bikes out to having someone deliver the bike and set it up in your home. That proved to be a bad strategy long term. Once the pandemic restrictions are lifted, people going out, they've started to go back to the gyms the way they normally did. So they had developed a skill set, someone who could set the bike up usually fairly quickly, who was no longer needed. And they either bought trucks or rented trucks to help deliver the bike. What does the future need? And HR helps whatever the managers believe is going to come up. Like you would as far as an inventory for goods, if you're manufacturing, you keep a set of inventory of future candidates in a test bank or in reserve somewhere. The best example I can think of is colleges. There are more adjunct or part-time teachers at all colleges, at least in the United States, than full-time. It's simply less expensive to keep someone around doing part-time work. The adjuncts supplement all the full-time employees and full-time instructors. They keep a running list. They will constantly send out a job request. We want to keep you in our data bank in case we have an opening. In case something comes up and we need someone, one of the adjuncts is available to teach this semester, so we get someone else to fill a role. This is a constant things that colleges do. One college that I taught for, I was teaching in the economics department. I went to the business department because I have a degree in both fields and asked, could I start teaching on that side? I was told that they have something like 12, quite not 12, between 8 and 12 instructors in reserve. So it would be quite some time before they got to me. I found that really interesting that they kept that many people in reserve. They didn't need 8 to 10 advisors, pardon me, instructors or adjuncts. They just kept that many on a list. It was really interesting that the dean in the business department wanted to teach part-time to keep his skill set up. He was on the waiting list. The dean of the department wasn't allowed to teach because they didn't have enough room for him to do that. They felt that that would be taking a job away from someone else, which I found truly interesting as far as you keeping an inventory of employees. This goes back to supply and demand. Hopefully you've had a little economics in there. You're trying to figure out whether or not you are going to need more employees. This goes back to our example at Peloton. They assumed they were going to need a lot of employees due to high demand. They didn't. What happens if you have to reduce the labor force? These are some of the methods. Attrition, you know you're going to lose people. They'll get old. They will retire. You may offer early retirement packages. You're 2 years away from probably when you wish to retire, say 65. Here's some additional money. We wanted to eliminate that spot. We'll have somebody else fill it out. We don't need 8 people over in the design area for the widgets. We can get away with 6. Buyouts Perhaps you aren't that close to retirement, but we have to shrink the department down and we're going to give you some money because we're going to eliminate the position, just flat out firing and layoffs. The idea of the layoff is this is temporary. Usually you're not going to be back anytime soon if there's a layoff. Other things that human resources role in the business is to have some type of culture. Every business has a culture. What that culture is a little different depending on the business. Even within the business, different departments have different cultures. Just the way it is. So you are a part of the business and you get to set up what that culture might be. We're still talking about colleges. They are celebrating different things to display how the culture works. On many college campuses, if it is February, it is Black History Month, and they will have presentations, stories, and other things on campus. This is how they try to create culture or keep the culture that they have. And in the workplace, you want a diverse group because that is part of your culture. The advantage of you trying to get the culture is it is not that costly, and it just makes a better work environment. It makes it easier for you to actually keep an edge and resources requirement if everyone feels that they are welcome and inviting. The biggest, and I think these are more important, the creativity. If you have groupthink and everyone is viewing this problem in the same way, you're going to get the same results. Perhaps somebody from a different background, a different area of the country, a different economic or educational background will have a different take and may come up with a better solution. What is also big, if you have an opportunity or you're bilingual, you actually get a few extra gold stars because of that. The world is becoming smaller and smarter, more diverse, and larger companies are always looking for people with diverse backgrounds. Primarily, can you speak another language? I know certain businesses, if they are spread out and there are multiple locations, say a phone store, if they do not have someone who can speak another language, they may direct the customer to go to a different store to get service. So if you need your phone serviced from from a number of carriers, or your carrier has multiple outlets, I should say, they may not have anyone who can speak that second language, and they'll try to direct you to the store that's, down the street a couple of miles, hang left. So it is a huge benefit, especially if you want to get into different markets. The first thing you need to do to get into a different market is speak the language. Then we again back to culture diversity. How do you handle the different backgrounds, gender, race, religion, and so forth and so on? Studies have proven the more diverse the group is, it's bringing in different aspects because you're trying to meet the clients and the customers where they are at. And if your customer base does not mirror everyone in the company, then you need a more diverse background, if nothing else. Now, there are some people who are not fans of this for whatever reason. I've read stories about this. And then we get into different arguments, which we're not going to get into today. But if you have a diverse group, you probably need a diverse group in the company to service a diverse group. In college, there's always discussion of diversity. One of the things that is truly important in diversity is the different ages. In college, you have younger students. Typically, this is what we automatically think. Well, they're just out of high school, 18 to 22, they're coming to college. So this is the group that the college is serving. Well, you're getting more and more people who are coming back to college or people who have never gone to college. So it's a little different and they have different needs. I'm a little more seasoned, a little more gray hair. So when I see students come in and I know they are older than 22 and I can relate to them and they discuss, well, I have family and even older students who have grandchildren, I can relate. There's a bit of an advantage of having a little gray hair. The other side, I cannot relate to the younger group as much. It makes it difficult to tell stories and use analogies because it's such a wide, diverse group. There's the challenge with that. So the customers or the clients that I serve could be from, well, now we have high school students, dual enrollment, to people who someone who may be 70 and they have a lot of different life experiences. So someone who might not even have a driver's license to someone who has grandchildren. So a diverse group in the back office is useful to meet all of these people where they are at. HR, what is the job? What does it look like? How do you classify it? How do you describe it? This is a really good example of that. For you younger students or people who haven't filled out a job application in a while, this is typically what it looks like. There's a brief discovery, pardon me, brief summary of the job, what it entails, principal, what you are responsible for if you are hired, other roles in there, and certain skill sets they're looking for. So in HR, your responsibility would be to actually come up with this based upon the needs of the company. Your responsibility would be to find people to fill the role, and you can do that internally or externally. Externally, you bring in people with different diverse backgrounds, but it is a little more expensive and more time consuming. And in many cases, you have to advertise externally as well as internally. Not always, but in many cases. If you're doing the hiring internally, the advantage is they're already in the system and you have quite a bit of the paperwork done. They're part of the culture. They understand what is responsible. You have created the problem of moving someone from an internal position to another internal position. So you still have to do some hiring. And you can't keep hiring internally. So at some point, you will have to go external. But if you can do it internally, it's a good thing to have as well, depending on what the position is. The selection process. Oh, so many fun stories about the selection process. The application itself, how well was that filled out? Then the interview, are there any references? As someone who has done quite a bit of work being an adjunct at numerous occupations and numerous colleges, this never gets old as far as stories. It is amazing to me that the colleges will look online at the resume and then you have to fill out another resume again. I wish someone would come up with something that automatically preloaded everything correctly. And the problem is each college may use a different system and it will not preload. You have to go through an interviewing process where you're trying to display you are compatible with the people in that particular department. Usually that's what happens. Someone in the department may be several someones who are going to interview you and then get back collectively and decide what are the references. If you're unfamiliar with that, these are the people that you work with. And generally, it's better to have someone who's a supervisor of your work to demonstrate what you are good at. If you're just starting out, you probably don't have as many references, but I would suggest if you're a high school student, your instructors at your school will probably be the best source. And then again, social sites. I don't think, well, the employer might not search for the employee on Facebook, but if you have a Facebook account or any other social media account, they're going to look. LinkedIn is primarily for professionals or people who are trying to keep in touch with other professionals. Keep this in mind. The key for today's presentation, if you put anything in social media, just assume that it is going to be there forever. What does that mean? Anything you do when perhaps you're young and just figured, hey, who cares? It will be there forever. So be careful what you put out there. I'm just saying, think long and hard before you hit send. This is what a typical application looks like. Let's see, do we have? Wait, where is? I don't see it. Anyway, I was looking for a highlighter. Name, rank, serial number, etc. Educational history. More information, past employers. If you were new and starting out, you won't be able to put much in here. I will give you another piece of advice. The minute you have new employment, put it in a file and store it somewhere because you'll forget when you were hired, you'll forget your supervisor's name, the business number, and etc. Immediately put that in there. And as you go out in the world, you'll probably change careers. Just upload it there so you do not have to go scattering through your sock drawer to try and figure out what did I do with that last receipt. I don't know who I worked for. I don't remember the name of the supervisor. Was it William? Was it Bob? Was it John? Whatever. As soon as you get involved, put it someplace where you can get access to it. Once you are hired in, you get around to trying to figure out what you are going to do, and that is HR's department as far as orientation. This is where the cafeteria is. This is where you hang up your coat. This is where your parking pass and so forth and so on. And finally, you get around to the nitty gritty compensation. How much are you getting paid? While many people think that that is the most important thing, it may not be. As we said earlier, people leave because of the manager, not the job. So you want to make sure the compensation is within a reasonable realm or average compared to your peers in that particular position, but it does not mean that it is the only reason people do things. Back to utility. It's not always about the money. I'm not saying that it's not important. It is extremely important, but it's not always about the financial rewards. While you're talking about that, the structure should be here are where pay raises are. This is the reason for those. This is the things that you need, etc., etc. Individuals, again, particular jobs have different evaluations and different fees. The person, again, doing the work on the machines, keeping them running, probably has a different skill set than the person who might be using the machine to make the widgets. And as we said, a comparable pay based upon peers in that particular field. And there's plenty of information and plenty of places where you can actually find where the comparable pay is. Sometimes employers will actually put the pay out there, or you can go to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics.gov to figure out what the average is for that particular field. Different types of compensation. You're paid by the hour that you were there, a set salary, and then your hours probably will be in excess of 40. It could be a base salary and a commission. Usually this is sales, certain incentives if you do certain things. If you hit certain points that you've discussed with the employer, so many units of sales, bonuses, and profit sharing. If the business does well, you get part of the profits. So usually a part of an incentive for people to work a little harder. Certain type of benefits. Usually people think about the insurance benefits, healthcare being primarily the biggest one. If you try to pay for your own healthcare, it is really expensive. So it becomes much cheaper at an employer. So that should probably be one of the first things you're looking at. Is there any pensions? There aren't many pensions left in the country. What about unemployment insurance? That's generally taken out by the government. Separate unemployment insurance supplied by the company. That's a different story. Social Security is taken out by the federal government. You don't have any control over that, and the employer doesn't either. Then what type of vacation do you have? What are the days? What are the weeks that you have? When can I take them? And if I'm become ill, how many days do I have before we reach a point where perhaps I'm not paid or I get a reduced salary? Flexible benefit plans is a huge trend, and you can either go with the company's benefits or you can do certain benefits a la carte. This usually happens when you are married and your spouse has a benefit. Maybe your spouse carries you on their benefit at their business, so you don't need the one at work. So they might just compensate you whatever they had to put away. Once you have the employees, you want to make sure that they are quality employees and you want to keep up training. This goes back to one of my favorite things, my belief that especially community college should be a free benefit in the United States. And a lot of that is happening, I've noticed. Where I'm at in Michigan, they have programs, whatever county you are in. If you don't have a college degree, you can go to the community college in that county. And I've seen this done in other states in the United States. So the first 2 years are covered. Again, teaching other skill sets that you can bring back to the employer. Then there's feedback and training. Perhaps you're weak in some area and they have additional training to actually bring you up to speed. So once you're there, they want to keep you. This, I think, is a truly important ingredient, and everyone should ask, if it's not going well, what do we have in place to make sure we can both meet the goals? That could take, again, many forms. Sometimes they will bring in an instructor and have different classes related to the business on site. There's additional training. Some companies have training online you can simply sign up for and keep going and trying to improve your skill set, and that will be taken into account if you wish to move up in the company. Periodically, they want to review and develop people. You get feedback. Feedback is extremely important. See where you're at, see where you're going, your strengths and weaknesses, and it will be used as far as, again, moving up in the company. Typical appraisal form, it looks like hitting certain markers, checking certain boxes. There are objective and subjective parameters, things you can measure. Were you in on time? Did you get this report in on time? Those are things objectively you can simply measure. Subjective, how well you work with employees and others in your department, maybe the department above you, maybe the department below you. These things are subjective. And at this point, you might have the managers go talk to people in other departments about you, and HR would be handling this. They would say, okay, how's Charlie doing when he comes over to this department and working together, and how you collaborating? Oh, Charlie's great. He always brings donuts, etc., etc. Different performance views. Tell and sell. What is the employee doing? Listening to the employee and trying to figure out any problems. Let's set some goals. You hit these benchmarks and we'll go from there. Okay, takes care of most of it. If you're looking for human resources, these are prior acts about negotiations, labor standards, how many hours you can work, and so forth, equal pay, Civil Rights Act against discrimination, sex, race, color. And now the great one is age. Cannot discriminate against someone who has a little gray hair, which I'm enjoying. Okay, that tends to cover our presentation for today. Feel free to draw back on this if you need any more information, and you can contact me if you have additional questions. If someone is viewing this who is not a student here, does not substitute for talking to your instructor or reading the textbook and doing the practice examples in the book. All right, then, you have a good one, and I will talk to you next time.